and welcome to the Torvus Podcast. My name is Ari, and this is a prelude episode to the episodes that will follow. In this particular prelude episode, I wanted to touch upon the history of the Torvus Podcast and how it came to be, and also dedicate it to a very good friend of mine, Dane Botfield. Now, I've been sitting here for the last couple hours, recording and deleting and recording and deleting, and you know, it's difficult to talk about Dane in some ways because he passed away 2 years ago to cancer, and he had a tremendous influence on me and impact on me. But I'm going to kind of rewind here and tell you how we met and how the Torvus Podcast came out of that meeting. In about 2009, I got a message from Dane. He was living in Australia at the time, and I was running a site called Submissions 101. It was a jiu-jitsu site, and he practiced jiu-jitsu down in Australia. And he started asking me some questions about, training and motivation and things like that. And we struck up a friendship. A couple of years later, he came and visited me at my academy in North America, and he stayed in the city for a week. We ended up having beers, and we chatted, and we talked. And Dane was a remarkable human. Not only did he practice jiu-jitsu, of course, but he also had an 80s knowledge which was unmatched by most people that I've ever met. I happen to be a huge fan, obviously, of the 80s culture and movies and things, and we would talk for hours and make movie references that were subtle, but we would instantly pick up on. And we started laughing and say, wow, there's got to be other people out there that are totally into that kind of subculture of the 80s and B movies and things like that. And we said, hey, we should probably do a podcast maybe. And this was in about 2012. I said, that'd be a great idea. And at the time, I was working in the bar business, and I was a bouncer. And we were going to call the podcast The Bard and the Bouncer. He, of course, being the bard, the storyteller, and me, the bouncer. And we were going to kind of go from there. And it was going to focus on 80s culture and movies and geek references. But as life is, it's kind of twist and turned, and we ended up kind of doing our own thing, and it never came to fruition. He eventually did move from Australia, and he moved to Portland with his wife, Belinda. But we kept in touch, and we would have weekly Skype sessions and chat and shoot the shit. And it was always good. Dane always brought a smile to my face. He was a blacksmith. He was a Viking. He was a geek. He loved role-playing. He loved jiu-jitsu. Everything that I loved. And I was like, well, this guy's like a kindred spirit. So you can imagine that, we hit it off. So when he was living in Portland, he was training down there, and then he was diagnosed with cancer in 2016 and had 17 rounds of chemo or more, and it was a tough battle. And we still continued our weekly Skype sessions. And even though he was going through all this hell, and he was very real about it with me and the people around him, he still had his remarkable humor and his remarkable sense of 80s love that we still talked about just, right to the end. And after he passed away in 2017, his wife actually released a podcast that he had done. He'd done one podcast with a friend of his named Corey. And I listened to it, and I had no idea that he had done it. And I, obviously was glued for just over an hour of him just chatting with Corey about life and things like that. And I'm going to actually put a couple of segments of that podcast in this little prelude, because I think it has some value, and you kind of will get a sense of who Dane was when I do play those. So I had done radio years ago, and I wanted to kind of get into doing the podcast thing just for no other reason that it's fun. And, I work a very kind of stressful job. I'm a cop. I also run an academy full time. I have some other businesses, and I wanted to do something that was fun. And Dane always said, if we talk about 80 stuff and monsters and mayhem and martial arts, that'll be fun. And I said, it sure will. So that was kind of the impetus for the Torvus Podcast. And here I sit at 12:47 in the evening, down in my little podcast room here, chatting and putting this prelude together. So at this point, I think I'm going to insert Dane's segment from his podcast into mine. And one of Dane's remarkable skills was his sarcasm and his humor. And that's how he ended up dealing with a lot of things. And I draw a lot of inspiration from that. He came up with a fantastic quote, which you're going to be hearing shortly in this clip, about donning, a shield and hefting an axe of friendship and compassion and stuff. It's pretty remarkable, to be honest. So without further ado, here is my friend Dane in his first and only podcast, talking about how he deals with life.
I think the other thing that can be tempered with all this is also not to take it too seriously. I mean, you just can't, man. Life is for the living, and none of us are going to get out of it alive, and so, yeah, be compassionate, be grateful, laugh your ass off, read what you're going to read, do what you're going to do. I'm not saying throw care to the wind and light money on fire in the street, but you can't, so I ended this big post with my description of how I'm going to move forward, and maybe this is a good note to end on, but so I said I was going to cloak myself in the armor of friendship, and I was going to clutch a shield of wisdom and heft an axe of hope, and, with my eyes open and my head up, strike out, ever grateful in the only direction I've left, which is forward. The thing that I left out of that is tucked into that belt is a very, very sharp dagger called sarcasm. That is not always my first line of defense, but it's certainly not my last line of defense. And while it is maybe not capable of, killing some of the things that darken my door, it is very good at dispelling them for a while. And the way that I've been looking at it is that, you need these tools in your life, and you can find them, and they're out there for you. It's not like this is some Tony Robbins secret society, this is two white guys on a couch in Oregon, surrounded by comic books and building materials, talking about some stuff that means something to them. And that means that anybody out there can have these conversations, and anybody out there can feel these things. And I guess that's really what I want to do with this whole idea of this little podcast idea is to put some of this out there, and for the love of God, try and, whatever gods you believe in, praise Odin, try and put something back out.
So there you go. There's Dane's little segment from his podcast, which was called Dane's Army, by the way. And so the post he's talking about was, I actually wrote it down, and the quote, which I do think is remarkable, is, "And so tomorrow I will wake up and drape myself in the armor of friendship. I will clutch a shield crafted from wisdom, and I will heft an axe forged of hope." And that was from Dane Botfield, and his forge, by the way, was called Two Ravens Forge, which is pretty cool. And I got some pictures of him forging some stuff. Very cool. So one of the stories I wanted to kind of end off with here for the Prelude episode, again, just a little short intro so you can kind of get an idea where we're coming from, is when Dane and I chatted one day about super obscure 80s films. So during this conversation, we started kind of bouncing ideas off each other. And it started with, I think we said Remo Williams, which is not super obscure, but, a cult film nonetheless. And if you have seen it, it has Fred Ward in it, acting as a assassin. It's from the Destroyer series, novels which were written. So he went from there and kind of going back and forth. And then I had mentioned a movie called Damnation Alley, which is this post-apocalyptic, horrible film in the late 70s, which had George Papard in it, and the actor from Airwolf, John Michael Vincent. And they basically drive across the desert, and cockroaches are, 50 feet across, and scorpions, and everything's mutated. And it was absolutely hilarious because we started watching the YouTube trailers for these, and they're crazy. So from there, it kind of went into martial arts films. We started talking about ninja films and Revenge of the Ninja and Ninja 3 Domination. And this one point where Sho Kosugi, who plays the ninja, ends up taking a blow dart gun and blowing it. And I think it was a cop or a bad guy. Anyway, the dart goes flying out of the blow dart, and it flies right into the barrel of the opposing person's gun, and it blows up the gun in the guy's face. And so Dane and I had a huge laugh about that. And then it got even further. We started talking about a movie called Gymkata. Now, if you haven't seen Gymkata, I implore you to look it up. I believe it's on YouTube, and it's one of the worst, most hilarious martial art films of the early 80s. And it basically is a gymnast who is taught the martial arts to kind of run this obstacle course in this East European unnamed city, and he's attacked by the townsfolk, and there just happens to be in the middle of the town a stone pommel horse, which he ends up kicking everyone's ass. They all come running towards him, and he starts doing his gymnastics routine and doing kicks to the head and doing the pommel horse routine. It is so awesome that you have to watch it. So Dane and I had a good chat and laugh about that, and we had hours of conversations about things like that. So that's kind of what the Torvus Podcast is going to be about. Chatting about those movies, obscure stuff, martial arts and motivation, paranormal things, and just kind of the lighter side. So I hope you join me, and I'm going to leave you off with a blacksmithing quote from Dane, and we'll see you for episode 1 coming soon.
So, one of the things you said to me, and I'll never forget, is that in blacksmithing, there are no mistakes, just changes in design.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I can't take credit for that. That's an old, multiple blacksmiths have said that to me, but that was specifically equated to Mr. David Ogdenson out in Wyoming. He was the guy who said no mistakes in blacksmithing, just design changes. But I'm sure I've heard 2 or 3 other guys say something of the equivalent.
So put that to your life.